Have you ever felt like an idiot? Not just a simple fool, but an idiot in the most existential sense of the word. Someone who perceives the absurdity of life, who feels too much, who sees both the misery and the beauty of the world at the same time. If so, congratulations. You have already flirted with the thoughts of Dostoevsky, the man who made the idiot one of the most complex archetypes in literature and philosophy. But what does it actually mean to be an idiot in his view? And what if I told you that maybe being an idiot is the only way out of this sick society we live in? Dostoevsky did not write to please anyone. He wrote to open wounds that the reader would rather keep closed. His words are not mere fiction, they are sharp scalpels that cut deep into the flesh of human existence. His novel, The Idiot, is not just a story, but a philosophical thesis wrapped in tragedy. A brutal study of what happens when a genuinely good man is thrown into a world that only understands the language of selfishness and corruption. Prince Myshkin, the central figure of the narrative, is the last romantic in a time that had already traded passion for money, kindness for calculation, innocence for cynical cunning. His mistake? Believing in the purity of heart in a society that has learned to crush everything it cannot exploit. To the other characters, he is a fool, an emotional alien, a programming error in a system that only accepts players willing to cheat. But the question Dostoevsky forces us to face is unsettling. Who is the real idiot? The man who remains true to himself and pays the price, or those who betray, manipulate, and corrupt their own souls to survive? What is most unsettling about Myshkin is not just his naivety, but his ability to perceive the suffering of others with an almost supernatural sensitivity. He does not just see the misery of others. He feels it as if it were his own. It is what the Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran called the torment of existence, that rare and devastating ability to experience the anguish of others as if it were your own. And it is precisely this characteristic that makes him so unbearable to those around him. He exposes their masks, dismantles their defenses, strips away their illusions of control. Nietzsche, an avid reader of Dostoevsky, said that no one lies more than the indignant, because indignation is often not a response to injustice, but a shield against one's own guilt. Myshkin provokes this indignation in others. He is a constant reminder that something is wrong with the way we live. And that reminder is unbearable for those who have already settled into the game of social hypocrisy. The story of the idiot seems to follow the trajectory of a martyr, but without the glory of sainthood. Myshkin is not revered, admired, or understood. At most, he is ridiculed by some, despised by many, and destroyed by almost everyone. His kindness does not make him a triumphant hero, but a lamb awaiting slaughter. His love for beauty and his boundless compassion are seen as dangerous weaknesses, a vulnerability that can only end in tragedy. And the worst part? Maybe Dostoevsky was right. Maybe the world really has no place for the Myshkins. Because absolute goodness does not just challenge the status quo, it threatens it. It shows that the game can be played differently, and that is unbearable for those who have already learned to win by cheating. Where do we fit into this story? Would we be capable of acting like Myshkin, or would we side with those who despise him? We live in a time where cynicism is mistaken for intelligence and coldness, for maturity. We laugh at naivety, mock hope, and celebrate cunning as if it were synonymous with wisdom. But has this so-called cleverness brought us anything other than an unbearable void? Dostoevsky forces us to face this question without giving us easy answers. And the most disturbing part is that deep down, we know the answer. We know that Myshkin is not the idiot. The idiots are us, who spend our lives justifying our own lack of courage. The tragedy of Prince Myshkin does not lie only in his goodness, but in the time and place in which he exists. 19th century Russia was not fertile ground for pure souls. It was a land of feverish transition, where the old and the new fought a silent and cruel battle. The decadent aristocracy tried to maintain its pomp, while revolutionary ideals blew like the winds of an inevitable future. Orthodox faith, which had once given meaning to Russian identity, was beginning to crumble under the weight of modernity and nihilistic thought. Dostoevsky was not just a distant observer of the social and spiritual chaos surrounding him. He was a victim of it. His life was a series of abysses. Condemned to death for involvement with a group of subversive intellectuals, he saw his execution, cancelled at the last moment, exchanged for years of hard labor in Siberia. There, among criminals and the destitute, he witnessed the depths of the human soul without the adornments of social conventions. There were no masks among the condemned, only the raw and brutal truth of existence. This experience shaped his work irrevocably. Unlike other writers of his time who sought to understand man through reason, Dostoevsky plunged into the darkness of the unconscious, anticipating ideas that Freud and Jung would only formulate decades later. He understood that human beings are not governed solely by logic but by subterranean forces, untamed passions, unconfessed desires, and unbearable contradictions. The pain of consciousness is a burden that few are willing to bear. Most people prefer the comfort of ignorance, the illusion that everything is fine, and that following the flow of society is the safest path. Myshkin, however, did not have that choice. His very existence was an affront to the widespread cynicism. He saw through the masks, recognized the unspoken anguish, and refused to participate in the game where everyone pretends to be satisfied with their own mediocrity. That was his greatest mistake, believing that people wanted to be freed when, in reality, they were perfectly comfortable in their chains. The cruelest part is that his kindness was not enough to save him. Myshkin's tragedy was not just being misunderstood, but realizing that his attempt to redeem those around him was futile. He could not rescue those who had already accepted their own shipwreck. Dostoevsky knew this and forces us to face this uncomfortable truth. Not everyone wants to be saved. Voluntary blindness is a common choice because the truth hurts, exposes, and demands changes that few are willing to make. So, when Myshkin refused to play the game, he did not just isolate himself. He was actively rejected by a world that could not bear the weight of his purity. Which brings us to a disturbing question. Is it possible to live in the world without becoming corrupt? Myshkin never found a middle ground between absolute kindness and survival. He represented an extreme, an almost unattainable ideal, yet one necessary to make us reflect on what we sacrifice daily for social acceptance. How many times do we silence our voices to avoid displeasing others? How often do we pretend to agree just to avoid exclusion? The reality is that everyone, on some level, makes compromises to fit in. Myshkin, by refusing to do so, did not become an example to follow, but a painful reminder of what we could be, but choose not to be. And the price of this choice is dehumanization. We live in a world where cunning is celebrated and sensitivity is ridiculed. Compassion is seen as weakness, and emotional detachment has become synonymous with strength. But is it really? Or is this armor we wear every day distancing us from what truly makes us human? Myshkin, unlike everyone around him, still felt. He allowed himself to suffer for the pain of others, was moved by human tragedy, and believed there was something sacred in every being. And because of that, he was destroyed. But maybe there is something to learn from his downfall. Maybe his story is not a warning against kindness, but rather a call to a new kind of courage. The courage to feel, to care, to resist the cynicism that numbs the soul. Being naive in today's world may seem like a mistake, but what's the alternative? To become just another player in this cruel game, where feelings are disposable and relationships are mere transactions. Myshkin reminds us that there is something beyond that there is a way of living that does not require us to destroy all that is good within ourselves just to survive. And what if, in the end, it is not about winning, but about remaining intact? Dostoevsky does not give us this answer, but he forces us to confront it. He does not romanticize Myshkin's purity, nor suggest that we should blindly follow him. On the contrary, he shows us the brutal consequences of living without pretense. But at the same time, he leaves us with an unsettling doubt. What if the solution is not to choose between kindness and survival, but to find a balance between the two? What if true strength is not in shielding ourselves from pain, but in learning to carry it without becoming bitter? Perhaps that is the greatest challenge. In a world that teaches us to harden our hearts to avoid suffering, Myshkin teaches us that true courage may lie precisely in continuing to feel, even when everything pushes us in the opposite direction. He was not a hero in the traditional sense, nor a glorified martyr, but his existence was an act of resistance against the brutal logic of society. His story does not offer us a happy ending, but it gives us something even more valuable, a profound reflection on who we really are and what we are becoming. Which brings us back to the initial question: who is the real idiot? The one who refuses to play the game, or those who sink into it without question? Dostoevsky does not answer directly, because that is a question each of us must answer for ourselves. But he gives us all the clues to realize that Myshkin's tragedy is not an anomaly, it is a mirror. He is proof that something is fundamentally wrong with how we live, that perhaps we are applauding the wrong behaviors and punishing the wrong people. And that is a truth that is hard to accept. In the end, there is no way to read his story and walk away unscathed. Myshkin unsettles us because he forces us to look within and confront our own compromises. He is a reminder that life could be different, but for that to happen, we would have to abandon much of what we have learned to value. The question is, are we willing to pay that price? If the idiot teaches us anything, it is that goodness, far from being a revered virtue, is often treated as a miscalculation, a structural flaw in the fabric of survival. Myshkin's story is not just a tale of naivety crushed by reality. It is a study of what happens when someone refuses to adopt the masks that the world demands. And you? Faced with this uncomfortable mirror that Dostoevsky holds up to us, how do you see yourself? Would you stand by Myshkin's side, or would you join the chorus of those who call him an idiot? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think about this. And if this video made you reflect, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. I'll see you in the next video.